pastor friend in California. He told me a story. It's just too good not to share. And he was out eating at a restaurant, and he noticed that there was a mother and a little boy that bowed their heads and began to pray. So it was kind of cool, like these people in the midst of a restaurant. They don't care if it's public, they're not ashamed, and so they bow their heads and they begin to pray. Well, he noticed that. But the rest of the restaurant began to notice because the little boy led in prayer, but nobody told him that he was just leading his mother and himself. And so the volume of his voice, he was basically leading the entire restaurant, my friend said. And the kid starts out, "Dear God, thank you for my mom. And thank you for this food. And thank you that I hope that mom will get us ice cream at the end of this meal." And so everybody's kind of watching this kid and smiling how cute he is. And then he really takes it up a notch because the kid ends the prayer, no lie, "With liberty and justice for all, amen." And at that point, everybody in the restaurant is just in love with this kid, except for this cranky old lady who has her own ideas about how prayers should happen. And she is over there going, "Well, I'm asking God for ice cream." And she's just kind of doing this under her breath, but loud enough that the little boy noticed what she was saying, noticed her disapproval. And my friend said that he began to look up at his mom with sort of questions in his eyes and sort of this idea, did I get it wrong? Is God mad at me? And my friend said that his lip began to quiver and he starts to cry a little bit. And that's when my friend just had had enough. And so he walks over to the little boy's table and he bends over and he says, "Young man, I happen to know God." And God thought that was a terrific prayer. Little boy's got, a little hope in his eyes, like, "Really?" And my friend says, "Yes. And you know what? Ice cream is good for the soul." And I think that old lady probably should have a little ice cream, So little boy's feeling better about himself. My friend goes back to the table. He goes to his table, gets the idea that he's going to order ice cream secretly for the little boy. He tells the waitress, "You know what? I want you to get the largest bowl of ice cream you got back there. Send it to that table." So a couple minutes later, here comes a huge bowl of ice cream in front of the boy. His eyes get really big, yes, because it's ice cream, but also because if you think from his perspective, he prayed for ice cream, and then out of nowhere, ice cream comes in front of him. He is super excited. But this is what got really cool. He didn't miss a beat. He picked up the ice cream, takes it over to the old lady, and says, "See that man right there? He says ice cream is good for your soul, and my soul's good already." Is that not awesome? That was too good not to share. That is too good not to share. Now, I tell you that story because it's just so good, but also because here's the deal. When it comes to the condition of your soul, I don't think we can have our soul be healthy if it doesn't have hope. Do you agree with me? I mean, if we don't have a sense that the best is yet to come, if we don't have a sense that things are going to get better, then I just don't know if our soul is going to be anything but frustrated and downtrodden and sad. Steve Jobs, he said this: "Human beings can live for 40 days without food, 4 days without water, and 4 minutes without air. But I don't think we can live for 4 seconds without hope." I think he's probably right. We did Thanksgiving at our family. The way we do it is kind of a tradition. All of my wife's family from Wisconsin, there were 19 people that join us at our house. We host Thanksgiving. And one of our nephews is 2 years old. He's got bright red hair. He's the cutest little kid. And he cannot take no for an answer. Right? When he comes up, I heard him. He asked for a cookie. And when mom tells him no, he says this: "Oh, another day. I have a cookie another day." right? She was cutting his meat. And he's like, I do it. She's like, no, it's a sharp knife. And he says, oh, another day. I cut the meat another day. Because you understand what's going through his head. He can't fathom the idea that there's no hope. He's got to hold on to the idea that it could happen another day. One psychologist said this. He said, I don't care how badly a marriage is damaged when it walks into my door. The couple could have been married for 30 disastrous years. I don't care what the issue is, whether she's committed adultery or he's addicted to porn or there's been abuse in their past. I just have one goal. I want to get them to experience 5% improvement. Because the second somebody gets a little bit of improvement, they get hope. And the minute a person gets hope, anything is possible. You believe that? I do. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to talk during our Christmas series about hope, because I think a lot of us are tempted from time to time to succumb to hopelessness. We live in a world where evil shows up. I'm watching the news and people are stabbing each other on a train. What is that about? Shootings going on, people across the world in wars. I've got people that, we talk to after the service, and somebody comes up and says, can you come visit because my husband is, he's only got a few days to live, with tears in their eyes. I mean, you know the stuff. I don't have to rehearse them for you. This is a tough world in which to have hope. And when those struggles come, when those tough things are happening, you can react in one of two ways. It's either going to make you bitter or it's going to make you better. It's either going to drive you closer to God or it's going to drive you farther away from God. You're either going to react in fear or you're going to react in faith. And I want to look at a story today, 1 Samuel 17, where we see different people reacting to the same situation in different ways. The Israelites are going to react in fear, and David is going to react in faith. If you have your Bibles, you can open them up to 1 Samuel 17. If you didn't get a Bible on the way in, just want you to know, we always have Bibles outside, and you can take those, and if you don't have a Bible at home, you can take it home. That's our gift to you. Maybe you've got your Bible on your cell phone, that sort of thing. Do me a favor, make sure that we don't have cell phones going off and things like that. Try your best to create a little distraction-free environment here as we look at the Bible together. But here's the deal. You've got the Philistine army is on one side of the field. You have the Israelite army on the other side of the field. And the Philistines are sending out every day their champion named Goliath. You've heard the story, right? Goliath, David and Goliath. Goliath is coming out and he's taunting the Israelites. Send your best against me. And none of the Israelites want to go. David comes on the scene and he ends up fighting and defeating Goliath. And what I want to do is look at the difference between the Israelites' fear and David's faith. Read with me in verse 4. It says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Guys, that's about 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves. A bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His spear, by the way, was probably, those measurements, probably around 25 pounds. Imagine somebody wielding a spear 25 pounds. It says the shield bearer went out ahead of him. Do you know how we know the measurements of Goliath? Well, I'll tell you how I think we know. I think we had, Abraham over here with Levi, the Israelites going, how big do you think that guy is? It looks like 9 feet to me. I know. How big do you think that spear is? That's got to be 25 pounds. That's got to be 6,000 shekels, right? They are what? They are focused on the problem. Look at all the detail we have about Goliath, because they are just focused in on how horrible this problem is. Now, they're not focused on the fact that they've got their brothers to fight with. They're not focused on the fact that they're God's people. They're not focused on anything except the problem. Don't we do that? When we are reacting in fear, we sit around and we think, oh my gosh, I've got so much debt. And I just rehearse, I shouldn't have bought that, and I shouldn't have bought that, and how could I move that around, and I don't know, this is going to be really hard, and what if I lose my job, and what if we have a down month, and do you sit around and worry, and focus on the problem? Do you lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, just depressed, thinking about how horrible things are? And maybe things aren't that bad, but you're just dealing with and thinking through, oh, this could be better, and this relationship isn't that great, and I'm not in good shape, and I don't like the way my things are working at work, and I'm not as far in life as I wanted to be. And you see, when we react in fear, that's one of the things we do, is we focus on the problem. Verse 8, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, then we'll become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, then you become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Just a little bit of history here. The ancient armies were not dumb. Nobody wanted all the bloodshed that comes with, hand-to-hand combat. And since they believed that the gods determined all of our fates anyway, what they would do is they would put a representative of their army out on the field. Your champion and my champion. And whoever wins, well, then we'll believe that that's what the fate the gods would have for all of us. Right? And so they would think, which God is stronger, which God loves their people more, who's given more sacrifices to their God, which God is angry with you, or whatever. But the gods are the ones that fight, and so we put our champions out there. Does that make sense? All right, so with that context in mind, let me give you the next thing that people do when they are afraid, and that is E, they entertain lies. Do you understand? Look at this part where Goliath says, "Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul?" That is a lie. They're not servants of Saul. No, they're not. They're servants of Almighty God. They're servants of the God who, with 10 plagues, rose up against Egypt and got their people out of Israel, or got their people out of slavery. It's the God, they're the servants of the God who, when the Egyptians chased them down and their backs were against the Red Sea, he parted the Red Sea and they went through on dry ground. They wandered in the desert with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of clouds by the day. It's the God who sustained them with manna in the desert, just miraculous food. That is who they are. And if they realized who they were and weren't entertaining the lies, that they were just another army, then I think they wouldn't react with so much fear. You see, we entertain lies about who we are when we say things like, no one's ever going to love me. God could never forgive me. I'm a loser, and that's all I'm ever going to be. I'm just not good enough. You see, when we're facing a problem and we're reacting with fear, that kills hope. So we focus on the problem, we entertain lies. Let me give you another one. In verse 11, it says, "On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified." You see, they accepted defeat before they ever entered the battle. I mean, if it were up to the Israelites alone, the Philistines would have won without ever raising a sword. They entered into the issue just accepting defeat from the beginning. And some of us will do that. Some of us will say, you know what, I've tried to be successful in business before, and it hasn't worked. So yeah, I mean, I'll go back to school or I'll do whatever, but it's probably not going to work. Sure, I'll go to counseling, but, we've tried it before, and it just... Do you understand that some people, because of past failures or for whatever reason, maybe they're entertaining lies or they're focused on the problem, but they just accept defeat from the very beginning. That's what people who are afraid do. That's what people without hope do. Verse 23 says, as he was talking with them, Goliath, and the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. But whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Do you understand what they did? They ran from the problem. Do you notice that each one of my things spells out fear? Focused, E-A-R. That's because I'm a brilliant teacher, all right? Brad wrote this, so anyway. No, I'm just kidding. We write them together. But that's what they did. They ran from this thing. And how many of us are running from our problems? Oh, I've got this incredible responsibility with my kids. But guess what? I'm just going to spend as much time at work as I possibly can. Because I love my family. No, you're running from your responsibility. Or, you know what, I've got this challenge that I need to face, this problem that I need to work on. But guess what? I'm just going to run away into video games. Or I'm going to run away into the bottom of a bottle. Or I'm going to run away to the shopping mall. I'm going to do anything I can to sort of distract myself from what really needs to be happening. We run away. People will run away into more debt rather than face the problem, which is their self-esteem. They try to wrap themselves in a newer car, or wrap themselves in a bigger home, or wrap themselves in cooler clothes because they don't feel good about themselves. So they're running away. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what people who are afraid do. That's what people who are hopeless do. Now, if we get on the solution side of this thing, let's look at what David did. Facing the exact same situation, David has faith. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" You see who David is focused on? He's not focused on the problem. He's focused on God. If you're not convinced, then look back over the last series that our church did. We did Shuffle, we did the Psalms. And you know who wrote most of the Psalms? It was David. David in the midst of all of his problems, David in the midst of all these wars, and David in the midst of all the responsibilities he had leading, he would go home at night, he'd open his journal, and he'd write a song about how great God is. He'd write a poem about the Creator God. He'd write a song about the God that heals, the God who made the mountains, the God who can overcome, the God who can protect us, the God who loves us. And when you're focused on how amazing God is, you know, it's most people are going to come together. They say, "Hey, God, look how big my problem is." David's going, "Hey, problem, look how big my God is," right? Just real quick, I think it's really cool. We did the Shuffle series, and we used to get 1,500 or a little over 1,000 people that would read the Bible with us on our SOAP online journal. And during the Shuffle series, we had 6,500 of you looking and reading the Bible along with us. I just think that's so cool. What if we were a people who every day opened the Bible, read a chapter, and in the midst of it prayed and said, "God, what is it in here that you want me to apply to my life? What do you want me to learn? What do you want me to do?" And then if we actually went out and did that, folks, revival. Southeastern Michigan would break out in revival if every one of us just took 30 minutes of our day, 15 minutes of our day, read a chapter of Scripture, and then applied one thing that we saw in it. I guarantee it. If we were focused on our God, then all these problems and all these things that other people are afraid of, we would face with faith. Because all we could see is just how amazing God is. David did other things. In verse 45, it says, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and I'll cut off your head. This is the original trash talking, okay? Right here. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. You see what David's doing is he is anticipating God's help. He'd already seen God come through when he battled a bear as he was protecting those sheep. He'd already seen God come through as he was battling a lion protecting those sheep. David has seen God show up in his life. And so when he's facing this issue, he's anticipating God's help. What does it mean to anticipate God's help in your life? Let me tell you what it means in my life. Every time I make a projection, every time I make a budget, every time I'm asked to take on greater responsibility and I wonder, do I have what it takes? I try to leave a little room for God to show up. I don't know if you make projections or budgets or if God ever challenges you to greater areas of responsibility or has you take a risk, but I bet he does. And the question is, do you anticipate his help by going just beyond what you could do in your own power, what you could do with your own resources, what you could do with and just go a little higher and go, you know what? If God doesn't show up, we wouldn't be able to pull this off. And when you begin to live like that, you will see God come into your life and do amazing things. And you will begin to have stories that you'll build on over time. Do you know some people like this who they could tell you, when I was 12 years old, this happened. And then when I was 20, this happened. When I was 30, this happened. And it's like their stories get better and better and better because their faith is what? Growing. Your faith will not grow if you play it safe your entire life. And so anticipate God's help. Let's keep going. Verse 28, it says, when Eliab, David's older brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and he asked, why have you come down here, David? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness, your little shepherd job that you have? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down here only to watch the battle. Now what have I done? David said. Can I even speak? You see the older brother talking to the younger brother here. And David said, can I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. You see that David insisted on being involved even though other people were trying to drag him down, say he couldn't pull it off, talk about him as though he was insignificant. You don't have what it takes. Attacking his motives. And if you're going to be a person that lives by faith, you're going to have to ignore some of the judgment that other people have in your life. When you start coming to church and somebody says, yo, you think you're holier than thou. No, I don't. I'm just trying to get to know God better. When you say, you know what, I'm going to go to rehab and all your friends go, why don't you just come party with us? You think you're some big deal. No, I just want my life to get better. When somebody says, why are you going to counseling? Why don't you just give up on the deal? Why don't you just, go be happy, live for yourself? Well, no, because I believe that God called us to this marriage and we're going to work it out and we're going to grow together toward God. You can't always be driven by everybody else's opinion of you. You have to insist on moving forward with the things that God has called you to. I'll give you an example. I try to have high standards as a parent, right? And if you've ever tried to have high standards, you'll know that there'll be people that'll look at you and say, oh, you're sheltering your kids, or oh, you're too strict, or whatever, right? There'll be people that will do it. So we're going to Wendy's this week, and the boys were acting up, and so I gave them some push-ups. That's what we do, okay? It's one of the things we do. We give them a little push-ups, and so we get to Wendy's. I don't want to embarrass them and say, you got to do the push-ups in the middle of the restaurant. I never do that, okay? But we're right behind the car. I said, boys, it's time. Let's get your push-ups. We're not going to do it 5 hours later when it doesn't mean anything to you. Let's do it right now. So the boys get down on the ground. They start doing their push-ups. And here comes this lady through the drive-thru. She looks down at my boys, pushing the ground. She looks up at me, standing over them, and I just smile, you know. But you could tell, like she wanted to call Child Protective Services on me, like I was, doing some horrible thing to these boys. And she's just driving through. And I just smiled, and I just, when the boys were done, I always say, hey, good job, good job with your push-ups. And we went into the restaurant. That's how I handled it. The way I wanted to handle it was to tell that lady, I wanted to walk up, knock on the door, let her open the door and say, here's the deal, lady. I want you to know, my boys love Jesus. My teachers love the teachers they have love my boys. My boys are respectful to adults. My boys are doing well in school. And guess what? They can do more push-ups than you, okay? So that's what I wanted to say, but I didn't do that. You have to insist. If God is convicting you to move forward in a certain direction and other people are judging you and putting you to, you got to follow God. Verse 38 says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic, put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around. The idea is he's stumbling all over the place with all this heavy armor he's not used to because he wasn't used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he shook them off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in his pouch of the shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Most of you have probably heard this story, whether you've grown up in church or not. You know that David took 5 smooth stones. He put one of them in his sling. He went like this, let it go, and Goliath got hit right here, and he fell down dead. And it was just this amazing deal. God, taking the... It's the most awesome underdog story, David takes him out. But here's the deal. You'll notice that David didn't just run out and meet Goliath the way everybody else wanted him to. He didn't just run out immediately right away, but he went and prepared. He went and got his 5 smooth stones. Do you imagine he picked up just the first 5? Or do you imagine he got just the right 5? Do you imagine that he was taking that sword that Saul gave him and he was kind of going like this, going, no, this isn't the way to do it. This is too heavy. I got to do it the way God's been preparing me to do it. I got to do it my way. Do you understand that he didn't just run out in an emotional state of what you might call stupid faith? I don't know if that's theologically a thing, but here's the deal. I've seen people who, they're not happy in their job. And they'll come to a service like this, and we'll talk about faith and do what God's calling you to do. And they'll walk in on Monday and quit their job and not have anything else lined up except for bills. I just don't know if that's what God would call us to do. There are those who would see healing in the Bible or hear stories of healing. And I believe God does miracles today. But would hear something like that and say, you know what, I'm not going to go to the doctor. I'm not going to use medicine. I'm not going to do any of the things that God has provided for us. I'm just going to do it my own way. I'm just going to trust God. I think there is a level of beyond faith, which is like testing God. Which is like, I want to see some miracle that I can tell everybody an amazing story, or I want to see God show up in some way that I can brag about, or I don't know what it is that motivates people to go beyond sort of this level of faith into this level of what I can only call stupid faith. But some people will do that. They'll just rush right in. But David didn't do that. He took his time, he prepared, he thought about it. And then he went and did the impossible with God. Finally, verse 51, it says, David ran and stood over Goliath because Goliath is now dead on the ground, being hit by the rock. He took hold of Philistine's sword and drew it from its sheath. And after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines. Oh, now the Israelites have got courage. Now the Israelites have faith. And we can stand back and kind of ridicule them, and I'm kind of laughing at them, But I think this is probably one of the coolest parts of the story. Because David's faith had an impact on everyone around him. He focused on God. He anticipated God's help. He insisted on being involved even though everyone else was putting him down. He took time to prepare. And then his faith had an impact on everyone around him. There was something about that 5% improvement that the people went, we can get in. Faith is contagious, people. I talked to a guy just the other night. I was taking a tour of the building. He said, I've lived in this community for a year. I just have never come into this place. My wife and my daughter, they started coming a year ago. And, there's just, these are exact words, there's just something different about them. And I want that. Do you see how contagious it is? That's the gospel. That's Jesus. That's hope. And it's contagious. And most of you here, though we spend money on billboards and signage out front and postcards and your invited cards, most of you are here because you saw a little bit of hope in somebody and you said, I want that, and they invited you, or you just decided to come because they came or whatever. That's why you're here. And what Bob challenged you to, I want to challenge you to as well. People will come to church at Christmas time. They're more likely to do that than any other time of the year except maybe Easter, right? And so this is the time where you have friends or family or neighbors. And I would ask you to think about, what are their names? Who are they that need a little bit of hope? Because God might just be calling you to be the inviter in their life, to be the person that is contagious with your hope in their life. It had been 400 years. 400 years since God had said anything through the prophets, since there had been any miracles that were recorded. From the Old Testament into the New Testament, there were 400 years of time where things just seemed to get worse and worse and worse. You talk about hopeless. The Israelites were so tempted to just give up all hope. And it was after 400 years that this little bit of light came into the world in the form of a baby. And that little bit of light has made all the difference.